Good morning. Please, everyone, let's take our seats. We are about to start in 30 seconds or in about a minute. Please, let's take our seats. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Club de Madrid's 2025 Annual Policy Dialogue, organized in collaboration with the Government of Kenya on the theme of driving sustainable futures for all. My name is Nathaniel Mongare, and I'm honored to serve you as the Master of Ceremony for the next 2 days. Currently, I serve as the Director of Political Affairs, Resource Mobilization and Diaspora Affairs at the United Democratic Party, which is the ruling party here in Kenya at the moment. I'm also a member of the Club de Madrid's wide civic engagement network of young decision makers. And the wide network is supported by the European Union, bringing together a diverse group of exceptional young leaders under the age of 36 who are actively engaged in politics and decision-making at national and local levels. The initiative seeks to strengthen youth political participation and involvement by empowering young decision-makers to drive inclusive and democratic change within their communities and institutions. Allow me to extend our sincere appreciation to the United Nations office in Nairobi, especially Ms. Zainab Hawa, who is the Undersecretary General and the Director General of the United Nations office in Nairobi, and her able team for hosting this important event of Club de Madrid. And also, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kenya for supporting this event greatly. Over the next 2 days, we will be joined by a broad spectrum of leaders, including former heads of states and governments, members and advisors of Club de Madrid, multilateral and national policy makers, members from the academia, private sector, and civil society leaders, to explore a global financial system that is more inclusive, effective, and capable of meeting today's challenges. This dialogue takes place at a moment of profound global transformation. As you know, climate change, trade wars, economic uncertainty, debt vulnerabilities, and growing inequality demand a renewed multilateral cooperation and bold ideas. In this context, we hope that the ideas and the proposal emerging from our discussions here for the next 2 days will meaningfully contribute to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development and to the South African G20 presidency, offering a concrete and forward-looking recommendation to the current leaders. And at this juncture, I wish to commend Club de Madrid for supporting this round of the Global South G20 presidencies in their work. And I know Maria Elena will make some more recommendations and comments later on. To open our proceedings, it's my pleasure to introduce a special video from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Excellencies, dear friends, the resolve to advance a better world won't get very far without resources. And so I applaud the Club de Madrid for focusing this policy dialogue on the crucial issue of financing for sustainable development. Our world groans with injustices, gapping inequalities, developing countries locked out of the energy revolution, and the sustainable development goals willfully off track. These problems erode trust and foment frustration, and finance is at their heart. Debt crisis, painful repayment schedules, and soaring capital costs are enormous obstacles to investing in people. But last year, countries took a critical step forward. They agreed to the Pact for the Future. This calls for reforms of the multilateral development banks to make them bigger and bolder so they can facilitate greater investment and leverage far more private finance. It demands steps to improve access to concessional finance for developing countries. It urges action to assist countries drowning in debt service and an overhaul of the debt architecture. And it calls for greater voice and representation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. The Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville in June will be a critical opportunity to turn ambitions into action. I urge you to help make that a reality. Yes, the international landscape is undeniably tough, but together we can demonstrate that multilateralism can deliver. We can create a more just and effective financial architecture, and we can make sure our resolve for sustainable development is matched by resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for that message. And we want to thank him also for the unwavering leadership that he continues to provide. And it is with these efforts that we want to have a revitalized United Nations, an institution that is more essential than ever before, as you will all agree, and especially the reform on the multilateral system. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to invite our host, Ms. Zainab Hawa, who is the Undersecretary General and the Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, to deliver some welcoming remarks. Welcome, Madam.
Your Excellency Danilo Tau, President of the Club de Madrid, Your Excellencies, members of Club de Madrid, Your Excellency Cabinet Secretary of Health, Honorable Aden Douale, Your Excellency Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Korea Senghor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and karibu ni Nairobi. On behalf of the United Nations family in Kenya, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the heart of United Nations operation in Africa and the only UN headquarters in Africa and the Global South, the United Nations office at Nairobi, Union. Our lustrous, green, biodiverse, peaceful 140-acre campus is the perfect backdrop for fruitful discussion on critical matters that affect our planet. You could not have chosen a better venue. UNON's mandate is primarily one of global service delivery. As you all know, we are host to the global headquarters of the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, and the United Nations Human Settlement Program, UN Habitat, and an increasing number of sisters UN agency funds and programs that are moving components of their global operations to Nairobi in order to bring them closer to field programs they support, as well as take advantage of first-class world services at third world cost. A win-win if you ask me. UNON also provides administrative services support to UNEP, UN Habitat, and the Resident Coordination System, and other UN offices in 166 countries around the world. Trailblazers in our own rights, we are the first pilots of the United Nations Secretary General's efficiency agenda in the successful implementation of the Kenyan Common Back Office. In spite of very limited resources and multiple unprecedented challenges, our drive to be the best and serve humanity better has never been stronger. 100 acres of the land we stand on today was first gifted to UNEP, 300 staff, by the visionary first president of Kenya, Mwazi Jomo Kenyatta, in 1975. 3 years later, his successor, President Arap Moi, added 40 acres to the gift at the onset of UN Habitat in 1978 with 30 staff, for a total of 330 staff on the campus. Today, as the designated officer in Kenya, I oversee a total of approximately 20,000 personnel and UN assets, including 6,500 staff from 86 United Nations offices, 11,000 dependents, and approximately 3,000 transit staff who work in non-family duty stations in the region, but who come to Kenya as their home base for rest and reparation, to visit their families residing here. This number does not include members of the World Bank and the IMF, whom we also cover for security purposes only. The impressive United Nations presence in Kenya will all not be possible without the strong support of and close collaboration with the host government of the Republic of Kenya on multiple fronts. Ladies and gentlemen, today, Nairobi, headquarters to UNEP, is recognized as the seat of global environmental multilateralism. The United Nations Secretariat, on its part, noting the critical presence of UNON as the only UN global headquarters office in Africa and the Global South, is undertaking its largest capital investment of a total of almost $340 million in any single United Nations duty station outside of peacekeeping in Africa through UNON's two key capital projects. The Etoje renovation and new office building project, tagged at $66 million, being completed in 2025. The conference center upgrade project, including the construction of a new state-of-the-art assembly hall, estimated at $265.7 million. This project will see the construction of the only and first assembly hall built in Africa since the ones built in Geneva in 1936, under the League of Nations, and the UN headquarters in New York, built in 1946, respectively. The conference center upgrade project is currently underway at the design phase and is expected to be completed in 2030, after which, should member states so decide and call upon Kenya, our UNON Gigiri compound could host the UN General Assembly. This speaks to the power of vision and transformation. As host to the UNEP Global Headquarters, UNON is walking the talk of environmental sustainability, with a number of initiatives underway. For instance, not only are we the first and only UN headquarters office to have attained the ISO 14001 2025 certification for environmental management system since 2023. We are also targeting for our Gigiri complex to be substantially net zero by 2030. Talking about environmental sustainability, climate change is one of the most pressing issues in the context of sustainable development today. The urgency of this crisis demands immediate action, and countries, especially those most vulnerable to climate change, need access to financial and other resources that can help them mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change through mechanisms that are robust, transparent, scalable, and accessible to all nations. The concept of sustainable development is not just about protecting the environment or addressing social inequalities. It is about ensuring that present and future generations have the opportunity to live healthily, prosperous, and fulfilling lives. Achieving this balance requires the mobilization of resources, not just in terms of financial capital, but also in knowledge, innovation, equality, and international cooperation. The Club de Madrid annual policy dialogue on financing for sustainable development presents a unique opportunity to discuss and collaborate on sustainable solutions to the planet's most pressing issues and reinforce a whole-of-society approach to leave no one behind. Faced with increasing challenges such as climate change, poverty, inequality, economic instability, and increasing conflicts around the world that threaten to erode human dignity and global peace, there was never a better time to explore and discuss the crucial issues of financing the future we all want. One of the key messages of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals is that financing for sustainable development is not an option. It is an imperative. And international cooperation and engagement are vital for their success. On UNON part, we're simply honored that some of these discussions are taking place on our very own soil at the Gigiri complex. We trust your discussion over the next couple of days will consider avenues to deepening effort to mobilize resources and strengthen international cooperation, using finance as a tool to drive positive, sustainable change towards building a future that is prosperous, equitable, resilient for the benefit of all, and not just the purview of a privileged few. We wish you very fruitful deliberation and take the opportunity once more to say, Karibuni Yunon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director General, for those kind words, and thank you once again for accepting to host us in this event here at the UN. And now it's my pleasure to invite the Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs and my friend, Dr. Coril Singoe, who has graciously supported this event in partnership with Club de Madrid, to come and make some remarks and invite the Cabinet Secretary for Health. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Your Excellency Zainab Hawa Bangura, the Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, Your Excellency Danilo Tak, the President of Slovenia, 2007 to 2012, and the President of Club de Madrid, Your Excellency Eden Barre Duale, the Cabinet Secretary for Health of the Republic of Kenya, here representing His Excellency, the President of the Republic, distinguished members of Club de Madrid, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps in Nairobi, led by the Ambassador of Spain, who is also partly our co-host. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my task this morning is a humble one. It is really the task of welcoming you to Nairobi on behalf of my minister and the Prime Cabinet Secretary of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. Musalia Mudavadi. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us on account of other official engagements, but he sends warm, warm greetings. And he also wishes you the very best stay in Nairobi and very fruitful deliberations. The other humble task that I have before me is to welcome the chief guest, one of the most distinguished leaders of our republic, a member of parliament for over 15 years within our National Assembly, the first leader of majority of our parliament, the former cabinet secretary in charge of environment and climate change, and now the cabinet secretary in charge of a very important ministry, the Ministry of Health in the Republic, and my friend who is representing His Excellency the President. Please let's put our hands together for the Honorable Eden Barre Duale.
My sister and friend, Zainab Hawa, the Under Secretary General and the Director General of UN Office in Nairobi, Your Excellency.
Now I can remember anything I did before.
Oye, Adam, es que no hay coffee break entre esto y lo que es, él participa.
Sí, pero
It's interesting. Don't worry. Let me start. My sister, our host, Zainab Hawa, the Under Secretary General and the Director General of the UN Office, Nairobi, Your Excellency Danilo Turki, former President of Slovenia and the President of the Club de Madrid, Excellencies, former heads of state and government, Ms. Maria Elena, the Secretary General of the Club de Madrid, Excellencies ambassadors and representatives from international organizations, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am honored to welcome you to Kenya, and more particularly to Nairobi. I thank the leadership of the Club de Madrid for the bold decision to host this year's annual policy dialogue in Nairobi, and I hope that your time in Nairobi will not only be fruitful, but also very memorable. May I also take this early opportunity to convey a warm welcome to you all on behalf of His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, who could not be here today due to other urgent commitments outside Nairobi. His Excellency the President has expressed Kenyans' pleasure in hosting this dialogue, which is being held for the first time in Africa, and has urged all of you to feel at home and to take time to explore our city. I wish to commend the club members for their commitment to advancing dialogue on key issues affecting the world today, and especially those that are key to Africa and the developing countries. The choice of the theme for this year's dialogue, which is focusing on financing for sustainable development, is particularly important as it recognizes the centrality of adequate, accessible, and fair financing as a key driver for the realization of sustainable development agenda. And I'm therefore delighted that over the next 2 days, you will engage in constructive, candid, and insightful discussion on the challenge of global financing for development, including the need to scale up funding and reform the international financial institutions, the challenge of sovereign debt sustainability, and explore innovative ways to unlock private financing and international investment. The club's commitment to contribute ideas to address development challenges we face today will make significant contribution to our collective effort to build a society where no one is left behind. I therefore commend the teams that developed the 3 policy papers that form the basis of this policy dialogue. The finding of these 3 working groups and their recommendations provide food for thought and propose concrete pathways towards the realization of our shared development and climate goals. The policy paper on scaling up funding and the role of the multilateral development banks has echoed the main message of the Africa Climate Summit held in Kenya in 2023 and other regional and global forums on the huge gap in financing for the sustainable development and climate action, especially in the developing countries. Kenya, as a country, recognizes the necessity of implementing robust, inclusive, and forward-thinking financial strategies at the global level to drive the realization of sustainable development. We remain steadfast in highlighting the significance of affordable financing for development and climate goals. We are committed to enhancing global financing safety net to build resilience and capacity for countries to deal with the increasing number of shocks in a globalized and climate-constrained world, and to expand representation of developing countries in the international financial architecture. We therefore fully concur with the key recommendations of the working group, including the need to increase concessional financing and ambitious replenishment replenishment of the African Development Fund in 2025. Regular replenishment for the concessional lending arms to meet development and climate goals, and the expansion of regional financial arrangements in our continent is the way forward. We also note the recommendation of the second working group, which has highlighted a pathway to move from debt to development. Debt servicing burden, especially in the developing countries, where debt has reached 55% of the GDP of those countries, continues to hinder sustainable development and condemn millions of people to debilitating poverty. Global systems issues such as high risk premium due to poor credit ratings for developing countries have driven many developing countries into a debt trap, with the mega resources being diverted from the provision of essential services such as health and education to servicing debts. We therefore echo the call for development and implementation of a comprehensive debt relief and prevention framework to unleash the resources that will be channeled towards sustainable development. Kenya particularly supports proposals that ease the pressure on debt-distressed countries, including debt servicing holidays, debt cancellation, and debt swaps for development and climate, and measures to reform the global credit rating system. We need to promote the use of the state contingent debt instruments and increase the availability of concessional financing by multilateral development banks. The discussion on the international tax cooperation are also timely and essential in providing solutions to the challenge of the shifting profit to tax havens, leading to the loss of the much needed tax revenues, especially for developing countries. Tax reforms remains a key area of contention with the developing and developed countries, having different views on the modalities for an effective and efficient tax cooperation. I therefore hope that the discussion under this topic will provide tangible proposals that will balance between the legitimate need for countries to drive tax revenues from the private sector investment within their borders and promotion of foreign direct investment in developing countries. In this regard, Kenya supports the ongoing discussion towards the conclusion of a UN Framework Convention to promote an inclusive international tax cooperation system. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year is significant in advancing the agenda for financing for sustainable development and climate action. The policy dialogue could therefore not have been held at a better time. I am convinced that the outcomes of this very important gathering of minds and leadership on these key topics will shape the outcome of the forthcoming global events such as the G20 summit in South Africa and the fourth Financing for Development Summit in Seville, Spain in July of 2025. Kenya reaffirms its commitment under the leadership of President Ruto to driving sustainable development, not only within our borders, but also across the African continent and the global community. We understand that we are at a pivotal moment in history, and the choices we make today will define the future for the generations to come. As I conclude, I call upon all of us to remain steadfast in our commitment to shaping a future that is equitable, that is inclusive, and sustainable for all people in all parts of the world. Once again, I welcome you to Kenya and wish you a successful dialogue that will spur innovative ideas that will address the current global challenges while building a better tomorrow for all of us. I thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Duale, for those insightful remarks. And Honorable Duale is very special in Kenya because we call him the bulldozer because he's a bold reformer. In every docket he goes to, he performs. So thank you so much, Waziri. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Danilo Tak, who is the president of Club de Madrid and also the former president of Slovenia between 2007 and 2012. Welcome, President.
Distinguished guests and our hosts, Dr. Zainab Hawa, Undersecretary General and Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, Dr. Abraham Corey, Principal Secretary of Foreign Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs, and Honorary Adan Duale, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Government of Kenya. I would like to thank you for your powerful and inspiring statements which provided the tone of our discussions today. Dear fellow members of Club de Madrid, distinguished representatives of the diplomatic community, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor in my capacity as President of Club de Madrid to welcome you and to wish you a successful policy dialogue. Now, it's both a privilege and responsibility to speak to you from Nairobi, a city that reflects the diversity, complexity, and ambition of the African continent, a place where tradition meets innovation and where local dynamism is deeply connected with the global challenges and opportunities. And to speak here at the United Nations headquarters, one of the 3 United Nations headquarters in the world. There could be no more fitting setting and no more urgent moment for this conversation. I wish to once again express my appreciation to Ms. Zainab Hawa Bangura and the United Nations Office in Nairobi for their warm welcome and continued support for Club de Madrid and its members. Convening here at the UN office carries a great deal of significance and symbolism. This is a place where multilateralism is living, and it's lived and practiced every day. It allows us to connect directly with diverse, grounded work of the United Nations across the African continent and the whole world, and to engage with those shaping regional responses to global challenges. Now, this is especially important when it comes to our discussions on financing for development. We are particularly grateful in this context to the government of Kenya and for its valued partnership and leadership in co-hosting this policy dialogue. We are deeply grateful to you, Cabinet Secretary, for honoring us with your presence, and we would like to convey our appreciation to President Ruto. Kenya's long-standing commitment to regional cooperation, sustainable development, and multilateral diplomacy has played a key role in shaping the substance and spirit of this policy dialogue. And also I would like to extend our sincere thanks to our institutional partners for their support. The African Bank and the Ministry of African Development Bank and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain, as well as Ford Foundation, Liz Mons Center, the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, the Civic Initiative of the World Bank, and Oxfam. We are grateful to our content and knowledge partners, including the Boston University Global Development Policy Center, the South African Institute of International Affairs, and in particular to our advisor, Professor Jose Antonio Ocampo, whose contributions have been central to the preparatory work leading to our discussions today. Now, the range and quality of these partnerships speak to the complexity of the agenda before us. We have to work with many partners, and the imperative of sustained multi-stakeholder cooperation, which has to be practiced at every step, including in the preparations and conduct of this policy dialogue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this year marks a decade since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a historic expression of shared ambition endorsed unanimously by all member states of the United Nations. It was neither a partisan vision nor an ideological project. It was, and it is, a carefully negotiated roadmap grounded in common values, universal values, and designed to guide humanity towards a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future. Yet today, the context in which that consensus was forged has changed dramatically. We are witnessing growing geopolitical tensions, increased polarization, and a visible erosion of trust in the institutions of multilateral cooperation. International agreements, built over decades through efforts and negotiation, are under strain, and in some cases at the risk of regression. The 2030 Agenda, conceived as a global public good, is no exception. Voices are growing louder, some deliberate, others opportunistic, that seek to discredit the very notion of common purpose. In the face of such pressure, we must respond with clarity and conviction. And I repeat, with clarity and conviction. As democratic, former heads of state and government, we have a responsibility to uphold the integrity of this shared vision and to remind our current leaders of their duty, not only to honor the commitments made, but to implement them in full. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are here in Nairobi, in the office of the United Nations. The reality we face is, of course, sobering. Nearly 85% of the Sustainable Development Goals are off track. In several areas, including hunger, extreme poverty, and inequality, we are not simply stagnating, we are regressing. The climate crisis is accelerating this trend. Last year was the hottest on record, marked by unprecedented floods, droughts, and heat waves with particularly severe consequences for climate-vulnerable regions, including many of this continent, Africa. These overlapping crises are not only testing the resilience of our societies, they are exposing deep structural injustices that the international system has failed to correct. The erosion of trust in multilateralism is not abstract. It reflects a persistent failure to deliver meaningful results at the scale and speed required. And at the heart of all this lies the systematic gap in financing. The global shortfall to meet the SDGs is now estimated over $4 trillion annually. Commitments on climate finance remain unfulfilled. And many countries, particularly those already facing debt distress, lack the fiscal space to invest in their own long-term development. Without adequate and affordable finance, there can be no inclusive growth, no credible climate transition, and no structural transformation. The task before us is not to revisit our collective goals. It is to realign global financial flows with those goals, equitably, consistently, and I emphasize, at scale. But realignment alone will not be enough. Restoring trust in the system requires that we turn ambition into tangible results, results that people can see and people can feel. As the United Nations approaches its 80th anniversary, the credibility of the multilateral system is under intense scrutiny. In a world marked by overlapping crises and heightened uncertainty, delivering tangible results, particularly in financing sustainable development and climate action, is essential for restoring trust. This is why it is important that those who claim to support what is called rule-based international order, I must say an ambiguous concept, and one that calls for greater clarity and serious commitment, those who claim to support the rules-based international order commit to leadership and to lead by example. Progress, ladies and gentlemen, is still possible, but it will not come from declarations. It must come from deliberate action. Dialogue, solidarity, and shared responsibility remain the strongest foundations for effective global cooperation. The emergence of a multipolar world, which is appearing before our eyes, offers an opportunity to broaden leadership and diversify perspectives. But multipolarity without a strong multilateral system is not a desirable outcome. Without common rules and principles, shared commitments, without strong institutions, fragmentation will only deepen and inequality will worsen. A world of many voices still requires a center of coordination and coherence, with the United Nations playing that role more firmly than ever. And let us therefore remember Article 1 of the Charter of the United Nations. United Nations to be the center of dialogue and building coherence. This is why the Club de Madrid continues to advocate for renewed multilateralism, the one that is inclusive, representative, and fit for the purpose. We must strengthen the United Nations system, and we must ensure that global economic governance, including the international financial architecture and multilateral trading system, is aligned with the imperatives of sustainable development, climate justice, and long-term resilience. It must include respect for and implementation of international law. Referring to rule-based order will not be enough. There is a need to restore respect for and build implementation of international law. The year ahead offers critical opportunities to move from analysis to agreement and action. The 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla, COP30 in Brazil, the 2nd World Summit for Social Development in November this year, and South Africa's G20 presidency, each of them represent a strategic moment to reshape global priorities and deliver concrete outcomes. Now, these processes must not be seen in isolation. They must be coherent, mutually reinforcing, and grounded in principles of equity, effectiveness, and inclusion. Taken together, they offer a chance to demonstrate that multilateral cooperation can still deliver, that dialogue can translate into direction, and that commitment can lead to change. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here to confront one of the most pressing questions of our time. That is how to mobilize the resources to reform the systems and strengthen cooperation required to deliver on the promise of sustainable development, equitably, effectively, and, I emphasize, at scale. At the center of this challenge lies a global financial system that no longer reflects the realities of today's world. It was designed for a different era, one with fewer actors, narrower risks, and less ambitious goals. But now we live in an age defined by complexity, high interdependence, and systemic vulnerabilities, from climate shocks to debt distress, from inequality to conflict. This outdated architecture cannot deliver the scale of investment or the quality of support required to meet the needs of billions of people. Reform is not optional. It is necessary for relevance, for legitimacy, and for impact. Multilateral development banks have a critical role to play in this transformation. But to do so, they must evolve, both in scale and in mandate. They can no longer function primarily as lenders of last resort. They must become proactive institutions that catalyze investment, support innovation, and strengthen resilience in the face of structural vulnerabilities. This requires bold action. Multilateral development banks must significantly increase their lending capacity, make better use of their balance sheets, and reorient concessional finance towards high-impact areas aligned with national development strategies. They must also work in closer partnership with governments, regional institutions, and private sector, acting as enablers of sustainable development rather than simply providers of credit. Equally, we must ensure that global liquidity mechanisms are fit for the purpose in the moment of crisis. That strategic issuance and deployment of special drawing rights and the criterion of flexible, rapid access instruments within the international financial system are essential to help countries to absorb shocks without derailing their development paths. Liquidity must be a tool for global stability and solidarity, not a privilege of the few. Now, the legitimacy of international financial governance depends on its ability to reflect the world it seeks to serve. Yet today, key institutions remain shaped by outdated power structures that no longer correspond to current global realities. If we are to build a system that is credible and effective, greater representation, particularly for developing countries, must be at the heart of reform. Without that, trust will continue to erode, and with it, the capacity to act collectively will erode as well. For many developing countries, the weight of debt has become unsustainable, constraining diverting resources away from essential services and long-term investment. Rising costs, tighter conditions, and overlapping crises are pushing governments to the brink. Yet the international system continues to rely on an outdated and fragmented approach to debt resolution, slow, opaque, and often misguided and misaligned with development needs. The Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development must advance a credible commitment to change. Without meaningful reform, the debt crisis will remain a structural barrier, a formidable structural barrier to progress. Now, addressing the debt challenge will require political will, coordinated action, and departure from business as usual. I look forward to listening views to be expressed at this policy dialogue on how we can advance realistic and meaningful proposals in this area. Dear friends, international tax cooperation has long lagged behind other areas of global economic governance. Yet for many countries, particularly in the global south, the costs of inaction are substantial. Revenue costs to base erosion, profit shifting, and illicit financial flows limits their ability to invest in sustainable development. Today, important proposals are on the table, proposals which command full attention. From rebalancing taxing rights to taxing high net worth individuals. These ideas deserve serious attention. The ongoing negotiations towards a UN Framework Convention and the financing for development process more broadly offer a timely opportunity to advance this agenda with ambition and inclusivity. And then official development assistance. It remains essential, particularly for countries facing conflict, fragility, and climate vulnerability. Yet we are seeing growing political, fiscal, and ideological pressure on aid budgets. In some donor countries, long-established institutions are being dismantled and financial commitments quietly rolled back. Now, this shift is not only short-sighted, it sends the wrong message. Development cooperation is not a matter of discretion. It is a shared responsibility and a test of credibility. At a time when global solidarity needed most, official development assistance must be protected and reinforced, not questioned or repurposed. The threat of new global trade war, another aspect that looms large, and it serves no one. At a time when solidarity and shared solutions are urgently needed, escalating trade tensions are a distraction from collective priorities. We all bear a heavy cost. We need a course correction, one that restores trade as a platform for cooperation, builds resilience through fair and inclusive rules, and supports the structural transformation that sustainable development demands. The multilateral calendar ahead presents both an opportunity and a test. The 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, the World Social Summit, COP30 in Brazil and G20 under South African presidency provide a platform to advance solutions. It is their convergence that gives this moment a true significance. These are not isolated events. They are interdependent processes if approached with coherence and ambition, can reinforce one another and drive systemic change. We must seize this moment with strategy and purpose. The cost of inaction or disconnection would be measured not only in missed opportunities, but also in diminished credibility and less than promising future. Now, this policy dialogue, which we are starting today, is a space to listen, to reflect, and to contribute constructively to the international discussions that are taking shape this year. As former heads of state and government, we do not claim to have all the answers, but we hope that our collective experience can help informing the ongoing efforts and to bring attention to voices and priorities that risk to be overlooked. Naturally, the outcome of all these processes will have to be a consensus, but we do not seek that consensus alone. We are here with our partners who share a commitment to more just, inclusive, and effective forms of international cooperation. Our ambition is clear: to support together the search for greater coherence and impact where it is most urgently needed. And it is needed for everybody. It is needed for the ones in most need and the ones who believe that they should lead and that their needs will be taken care of by their own individual national policy. I look forward to listening to your insights, to your perspectives and your proposals. This dialogue is shaped by the diversity of experience and conviction that each of you brings to the table. I thank all of you who are participating in this conversation and for your commitment to advancing a multilateral agenda that delivers where it matters most. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a successful policy dialogue.
Thank you so much, President Tuck, for those insightful remarks. And also, thank you for leading Club de Madrid's efforts in advancing this important topic, and also for mobilizing the members of Club de Madrid to support this agenda. So thank you once more for this. Allow me to recognize Ali Mohammed, Ambassador Ali Mohammed, who is the Special Climate Envoy to the President of the Republic of Kenya, President William Ruto, who is also with us here. Please, Ambassador Ali. Thank you so much. Now, the chief guest, Honorable Duale, has another session, so he would like to be excused in the Parliament of Kenya. So, Waziri, you're at liberty to leave. Also, the Principal Secretary as well, so I wish to excuse this panel as we usher in the next panel. Thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. Thank you so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are shortly going to have a panel, our first panel discussion on the first topic. It's an open panel discussion. So, okay. I wish to ask the participants for this first panel to please take your seats on stage. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going into our open panel discussion on the topic of the challenge of global financing for development. So this panel sets stage for the next 2 days ahead of us by assessing the current landscape of global financing for development and climate action. As you know, at the moment, we are marked by growing inequalities among the population, converging and overlapping crises, and pressing demands for reform. And even the previous speakers have mentioned this. So this panel will reflect on the most salient systematic challenges and explore realistic pathways towards a fairer and a more resilient international financial architecture. So this conversation will also inform and contribute to key multilateral processes, including the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development and the upcoming G20 Summit under the presidency of South Africa. So we are joined on stage with Michelle Bachelet, who is the former president of Chile and the vice president of Club de Madrid. Please raise up your hand. Also, we are joined by Musa Mara, who is the former Prime Minister of Mali and a member of Club de Madrid and my friend. We also have Jose Antonio Ocampo, who is the former Minister of Finance of Colombia and a former UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, and also an advisor to Club de Madrid. Then lastly, we have Francesc Point Casellas, who is the head of International Economy and G20 unit in the Office of the Prime Minister of Spain, who is joining online, virtually. Now, this session will be moderated by Mr. Sean Cleary, who is the Executive Vice Chair of the Future World Foundation and an advisor to Club de Madrid. Mr. Sean, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, and thank you for the way in which you've managed the proceedings up to this point and will continue to do so. The wonderful thing about this particular session is that 2 or 3 interventions that have already been made in the opening session have actually framed the issue admirably. The Cabinet Secretary for Health, in his overview of the work that has been undertaken by the working groups put together by the Club de Madrid, described the primary themes in each one of those working groups, one of which I should point out was in fact coordinated by Jose Antonio Ocampo, who is with us on this panel. In addition to that, President Turk outlined the comprehensive challenges that lie ahead of us in that regard. He indicated what different areas deserve attention and how we ought to think about integrating those different components into a single set of obligations to enable multilateralism and, I would argue, national governance work to the benefit of humanity. It's worthwhile recognizing that that is humanity embedded in the Earth system. We cannot ignore the challenges of climate, of oceans, of biodiversity when we are thinking about the well-being of humanity. All of these elements are fundamentally interconnected, and that's one of the primary reasons why narrow nationalistic focus does not provide any solution to the challenges of the global commons. Now we're at a remarkable point. One part of it are the institutional challenges that have already been identified. The fact that the institutions on which we rely are, quite frankly, in many cases not fit for purpose. But another reason is that the period when the world was afflicted by COVID also contributed enormously to the widening of inequalities between advanced economies, some of the leading emerging economies, and the developed and less developing economies in the world. And within each economy, let me say, those who were less privileged throughout the whole of the COVID period suffered markedly more. So where are we today? Broadly speaking, at the end of 2023, and it went up in 2024, but the figures haven't yet been published, developing countries' external debt was 11.4 trillion, which was just shy of 100% of their export earnings. Rising debt burdens are forcing developing countries into wholly unacceptable trade-offs. Rebecca Greenspan, to her credit, made a very interesting remark in this regard. She said that many of these countries are defaulting on their development in order to avoid defaulting on their debt. If you put that in simple terms, there are 3.3 billion, that's over 40% of the world's population, people, who are spending more on debt service than on education and health. There are roughly, in almost every developing country in the world, more money is being spent on debt service than climate adaptation. It's quite clear that's not a sustainable circumstance. So the challenge for this panel today is to be able to address the scale of this and then think within the parameters of the work that has been done already and their own individual experiences and their own geographies, to think about tangible pathways that we can use, focusing on Financing for Development Summit in Sevilla, focusing on the World Social Summit, focusing on COP30 and the summit of the G20 that will be held in South Africa. How can we use these instruments structurally and systemically in order to be able to address these challenges? I don't think we could possibly ask for a better group of people for this purpose. We have persons who have experience at the national level in both Chile and Mali, persons who have experience in the international organizations, in the case particularly of Michelle Bachelet, who was, of course, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and persons in the person of José Antonio Ocampo, who have been responsible for DESA within the framework of the United Nations. So those are the perspectives that we're going to bring to bear. As he led the first working group in terms of the work that was done, I'm going to come, if I may, first to Jose Antonio Ocampo, to ask for his overarching perspectives in respect of this. Jose Antonio.
Well, thank you very much, and let me express that I'm delighted to be in this meeting today. So I thank Danilo Turk and Marilena Agüero for, bringing me on board in this process. Let me say that the agenda that we have for the conference, which is now in draft 1 of the document, as well as the proposals of the expert group, is actually a very broad agenda, very much like the Addis Ababa agenda that was approved 10 years ago. But let me perhaps briefly mention some topics that are going to be, of course, discussed in different sessions. I think the most important, the most urgent is the issue of debt, because about 1/3 of developing countries are over-indebted, and the others are paying very high interest on their debts. This requires, in my view, a short-term solution. So it could be an improvement of the common framework, but also an alternative solution to relieve rapidly the debt burden. And second, a permanent institution to which be in charge of this topic going forward, which could be in the United Nations or could be in the IMF, so long as its decisions are independent of the IMF board. The second is the issue of development financing. And in that regard, let me say that, of course, the most troublesome issue today is the reduction in official development assistance. The closing of USAID, but also the reduction in ODA funds from several European countries, are one of the most troublesome issues. This is important because that's essential for the concessional financing that many countries, particularly the African countries, require. But the other topic is how to enhance the role of multilateral development banks, both the World Bank Group, but also the regional development banks and the inter-regional development banks. So it's a quite a dense network. Actually, the regional development banks have been growing faster than the World Bank. So that's a good opportunity for those institutions. I mean, the proposal is basically to triple the financing from the World Bank Group. And of course, the relation to national banks, I'll talk about that in the second part of this session. The third issue is environmental financing, both climate change and biodiversity. There have been advances in this regard in the last COPs last year, and I hope in the COP in Brazil this year, the climate is enhanced even more. It's not only the Multilateral Development Bank, but the special funds that have been created to promote the agenda. The fourth issue is international monetary cooperation. And in that regard, improving the credit lines of the IMF, particularly in my view, the contingency credit lines, which are these, these credit lines that are given to countries, but countries can use or not, or remain as funds to be used in the IMF. But also how the IMF can intervene in the bond markets of emerging and developing countries during crisis, which is a very important issue that the Federal Reserve has done in the US, the European Central Bank in Europe, but there is no mechanism to intervene in the bond market. And the third issue in that regard is the special drawing rights, how to make a more efficient use of special drawing rights. And our proposal in the expert group is to eliminate the dual accounting so that the SDR that are not used become deposits of countries in the IMF, which can be then used by the IMF for lending operations, or countries can transfer them into special funds to promote different development purposes. Tax cooperation is the fifth big issue. In that regard, of course, the issue of fair taxation of multinationals, as well as taxing the very rich, are the two essential issues. That is in the hands of the UN Tax Convention that is being started to negotiate actually a proposal of the African Union, I must underscore, which is a process going. And it's totally linked to the issue of illicit financial flows, which, due to the flows that go through corruption and as well as the narco trafficking in the case of Latin America, which are generally done through illicit financial flows. Let me say that the still another issue is trade. Now with of course the decisions yesterday from the U.S. Government, we have to see how the WTO commitments are binding, how the WTO continues to be a relevant institution, but also how the many free trade agreements continue to be binding, as well as the resetting the dispute settlement mechanism of WTO, which was actually a very good mechanism, but has been interrupted for several years. And finally, the issue of investment. The investment agreements is something that require particularly new dispute settlement mechanisms in order to avoid the country from being charged for social and environmental purposes that they may face. Now, the negotiations are being tough, but in my view, it is an agreement between developing countries inside the South with Europe that is going to be the relevant negotiations. I've been talking with both groups in New York, and I am optimistic that something good is going to come out. Of course, some countries, and notably the United States, has already complained about the draft one, but there is, I think, a good possibility of having a very good outcome if we get this alliance between the developing countries and the European countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. I think that sets a fine frame for the discussion. We now want to dive a little bit deeper because developing countries are the ones who are most under stress in these particular circumstances. And I might note that although this is a departure from the norm that I ordinarily wouldn't feel comfortable with, Michelle Bachelet has made the very sound observation that as Africa is actually in the condition of greatest stress in this regard, she would like to allow Musa Mara to have the floor first to speak from an African perspective to the issue, and she will then bring up the rear, as it were, from a Latin American perspective. So, Musa, over to you.
Thank you, Shen. Thank you, Shen. When we try to talk about financing the development, I think in our continent, the most important thing is financing to save our state and to save our financial system inside the different states. That links directly to the sovereign debt issue. I remember last year I was on the same room here to talk about the same issue, and I gave some figures, concrete figures to talk about the debt issue. And the situation this year is worse than what I talked about last year. And I am going to give to the Assembly the figures about my own country, which I think represents a bit a standard exemplary of how sovereign debt is progressively undermining our financial system and even our state's ability to provide and to deliver service to the people. This year, Malian budget is 3,000 billion francs CFA. This is around of 4.5 billion euro, 3,000 billion francs CFA. These 3,000 billion are shared in different parts. 1,000 goes to the civil servant salary. 1,000, 1/3 of the budget. 1,000 goes to the debt service. 1,000 billion, 1/3 of the budget goes to the debt service. This is 1/3. The remaining 1/3 is shared between defense and security issues, defense and security expenditure, around of 400 billion, and the other 600 billion, this is for health, education, infrastructure, providing job to the youth, and other expenditure. That means the budget, around of 25% only, is dedicated to things which could lead to development, providing service to the people. And the problem of this situation is the debt service grows every year by 15%, 3 times more than the growth of the state resources. That means progressively we are going surely to the wall if we don't react and to try to solve this problem. If you take the example of Togo in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Central Africa, Gabon, and other parts, you will find nearly the same. This situation is caused by the trend of states to borrow money from financial markets, regional financial markets, continental financial market, with average interest rate around of 7%. And the interest rates are also going up. This situation is not sustainable. And my understanding, if we go on this way, in the next 5 years, 5 years for me is the maximum, we will face to the failing of a lot of states in Africa, financially, and that will lead to instability and security, and some way in the civil war, it is possible to get it. For me, urgently, we have to deal with this issue. And this situation also creates an economical problem. The different financial actors in our countries give money to the state. That situation prevents them to finance the real economy, to finance the investor, to finance the companies. And without financing investments, we will not see any economical growth. And this situation also leads to what I started to say. I think we have to urgently be aware of this situation and try to solve it. And in my opinion, it is the 5 coming years will be the key to do that. We have to work on the multilateral way, IMF, the special drawing rights, we talk about that, to leverage the financial resources to help developing countries, and especially in Africa. We have to work with the central banks also. The central banks, they are involved in this process. The regional development bank, like ADB, even in the different regions of Africa, we have to work on that in order to find a way financially to help different states to face of this issue. One of the key questions is to stop the trend using financial market. to come to multilateral way to provide financing to developing countries and to reduce strictly the interest rates. We have to work on this way, and I think there is some solution of that. I will stop here and continue to talk about this issue after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Musa, especially for bringing it down to earth in so tangible and practical a way. Danilo Turk, in his opening remarks, made the observation that ODA, concessionary finance, and restructuring of the international financial system to enable development finance to flow is not a matter of choice. It's an imperative. Without that, let me be blunt, the combination of state failure in significant parts of Africa, particularly in the Sahel at present, associated with the disruption being affected by extreme weather events and climate change, is going to lead bluntly to a flood of refugees over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, which will have devastating consequences for countries across the Mediterranean. Have no illusion, it's upon us. As somebody who has combined the responsibility for national leadership in Chile with the responsibility for monitoring and management of challenges to human rights on the multilateral level, no one is better equipped than Michel Bachelet to put what Musa has just said into a wider context.
Thank you, Chan. I will share with the people here on the Latin American and Caribbean situation first, and then speak of some urgent steps that we need to take. Well, Latin America and the Caribbean since 2020 has had its worst economic contraction, minus 6.8%. And also that led to a high level of unemployment, 8.1 to 10.7%, 8.1 in 2019 and 10.7% in 2020. I mean, percentages doesn't speak about people, but we're talking about 44 million people who were unemployed. And some of the people who lost more the possibility of employment during COVID was women, because they had to stay at home. So many of these, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, women's place in the workforce is like 1 decade before. We lost that much. And poverty increases as well. In 2019, we had 185.5 million people living under the poverty line, and in 2020, 209 million people. There has been also a strong fall of investment, minus 20% in real terms, that will limit, importantly, the future accumulation of capital and the capacity of generating growth and employment and to be able to recover. At the same time, countries in Latin America and the Caribbean confront major limitations to mobilize internal and external resources. There has a high level of debt resultant of low collection of taxes, high level of transfers, and that meant that high levels and needs of liquidity. So this situation has meant that the fiscal space to implement political counter-cyclical policies will be very small, and so that will mean also to diminish the capacity of building a better future for the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I believe we're facing a critical conjuncture for the global financial system, and status quo is no longer tenable. The rising debt burden, inequality between nations, growing financing gaps for social development and climate action are not simply technical issues. They are fundamentally political choices. For the 2025, we have, as I was mentioned by many of who talked before me, this year we have a lot of opportunities. Of course, we have Sevilla in end of June this year. We also have, of course, in Nice in June, May, June, the United Nations Conference on Oceans. And oceans is really a very important issue if we want to deal with climate. And this is very important as well. Then we have, of course, the COP in Brazil, and then we have the Qatar, the meeting of Social Summit. That will also be a possibility of an opportunity for many things. And I'm forgetting, of course, the G20 in South Africa will be another great opportunity. But we need to take certain urgent and realistic steps. One of them, I think all of us have spoken of, is about deliver on debt relief and restructuring, not as one-off response, but through a permanent, fair, and transparent international mechanism. Jose Antonio was right. We need an urgent response to that, but not only one time. Then we have to build at the same time a more fair international mechanism, permanent mechanism. And you mentioned that as well, Jose Antonio. Developing countries, especially low-income and climate-vulnerable nations, are being asked to repay the debt while facing floods, droughts, and hunger. So we need more inclusive decision-making where debtor countries have a real voice in debt restructuring processes. The second thing, I believe we need to scale up concessional and grant-based finance for sustainable development and climate action. And as it was mentioned here before, multilateral development banks need to take bolder steps, including leveraging their balance sheets and revisiting their capital adequacy frameworks. But we also need new sources. Of course, we need what you mentioned, Mosa, in terms of special drawing rights. And there are some other countries who are thinking on the possibility of developing sort of I don't know if a taxation, a fund, to compensate many countries who are really suffering from climate change action. I'm thinking on the Caribbean, I'm thinking on country islands, and least developed countries who really have suffered a lot from climate change and need to have a bigger support on this behalf. But we also need new sources. We need taxation of fossil fuels, financial transactions, or extreme wealth that could generate the public funds we need. At the G20 in Brazil, President Lula presented the proposal for a tax for the wealthiest people in the world. It was not accepted, unfortunately. But I think we need to think on that as a possibility as well. But what was accepted and was launched in Brasilia, in Rio de Janeiro, was a global alliance against poverty and hunger. And I hope this works well. But let's not forget the private sector. We must align its incentives through stronger regulation and better risk-sharing mechanisms. And third, I'm not going to mention all the things that Jose Antonio mentioned that I think they really need to do that. But we also need to reform the governance of the international financial architecture itself, because today's institutions reflect the reality of 1945, not of 2025. So representation and voice must be rebalanced so that developing countries can help shape the rules of the game. Without that, there's no legitimacy, and without legitimacy, we cannot expect effective cooperation. Of course, we all know that geopolitical tensions make all of this harder, but that's why leadership matters. The FFD4 process in Spain, the G20 summit in South Africa, and the others that I already mentioned are rare opportunities. So we must push for common ground, not just in finance, but on values, equity, solidarity, and shared responsibility. And if we fail to act now, we will not only undermine global development and climate action goals, we will also erode, and I think President Turk mentioned that, we will erode the trust that holds the international system together. And both for this common challenge, we will really need a stronger multilateral system. So I think this is a time for courage, not just to fix what is broken, but to build something better, something more just, more resilient, and more inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bachelet. I think that final set of words that you used summarizes everyone's ambitions superbly. Can I now turn to Francesc Pontcastellas, who is joining us, as I think you can all see from the screen, virtually, because he's not able to be here today. He is, of course, the person responsible as the host from the office of the Prime Minister of Spain for the Conference on Financing for Development, the Fourth International Summit for Financing for Development in Sevilla. Francesc, we face rising expectations at a time of extraordinary challenges. The announcements on tariffs made yesterday against the backdrop of everything that has already been done to cut ODA and inhibit financial flows for purposes of development place, I think, an extraordinary burden, in a certain sense, on the Fourth International Summit for Financing for Development. I'd like, if I may, to ask you to address two things in particular, beyond whatever else you wish to say. One, how are you going to approach this trade-off between high expectations and extraordinary challenges? And two, can you give us any insight into what you think it might be possible to achieve in Sevilla?
Thank you, and thanks for the kind introduction. It actually makes me a bit nervous because you're putting a lot of weight on my shoulders. So yes, I'm definitely working on Sevilla and doing my best to help out, but I hope I'm not the responsible person, the one that will be singled out or pointed at if things don't go the way we want. No, look, thanks for inviting me. It's a real honor to be part of this impressive panel, and really apologize for not being able to join you in person in Nairobi. I wanted to start with a few figures now. I want to be a bit provocative, so please bear with me. France, 43.8%, Germany, 38.1%, UK, 35.3%, Japan, 34.4%, and Spain, 37.3%. These are not Trump's reciprocal tariffs. These are the tax to GDP ratios of a few OECD countries, which are all developed, G20 countries, including my own, Spain, which is a permanent guest of the G20. Now, I don't want this to sound as an excuse for ODA cuts that Professor Campo has already referred to. I just want to use these numbers to send a message of pragmatism. And I think this doesn't mean lack of ambition. It means trying to maximize what we can realistically achieve. And that's, I think, the main message I want to give you in terms of how we think we should approach the conference in Seville in June and July. Look, this is a very dangerous moment for multilateralism. We all know it. I don't want to enter into the reasons. We all know them. For the very principles that I think all of us here today feel attached to. And we're facing huge structural changes and, of course, opportunities. And, of course, as also President Bachelet has said, we need to take urgent action. But, of course, we also need to be aware of the risks. And the risks, I think, are losing each other's audiences. On the one hand, there's the risk that developed countries lose the trust of developing countries if they don't see the processes and the institutions as being legit, as also President Bachelet has just said. But we also have to bear in mind that we also have the risk of losing the trust of the citizens of developed countries because of distorted narratives. Don't get me wrong here. And I'll give you an example from my own country based on what President Turk had said at the beginning. The far right labels the Agenda 2030 as a quasi-satanic mandate from hateful globalists. And we know it's not. It's not an ideological mandate. But that's how it's portrayed. And this is in Spain. And I don't want to enter into, again, examples from other countries that we all might know. So again, this is a way for me to frame this. I don't want to be, again, pessimistic or negative in any way. I want to be, again, maximizing whatever is possible. And I think this ambition in general should be based on three principles. The first one is that development will be environmentally sustainable or it will not last. So, of course, it's hard for the human mind to focus on future existential threats when more urgent needs remain unmet. But climate change is existential, like it or not, for all of us. The second main principle is that development must focus on closing gender gaps, or it will be incomplete. From sexual and reproductive health to full and fair access to education and employment opportunities, for us, the empowerment of women is the key that unlocks economic progress. And the third, and again, I must say that I think that's a very important message, development will be tackled from a perspective of joint ownership and shared responsibility between developed and developing nations, or it will not happen. This is why I think we also want to put some emphasis on issues like the domestic resource mobilization in developing countries, focusing, again, bear with me, on higher income individuals, not just the super rich. Of course, the super rich also, and this is one agenda that Spain has been quite consistent in supporting in the G20 last year, and we are still pushing for it. We know, maybe I would say it's not ripe for compromise, but we'll keep on pushing that. But also higher income individuals must be fairly taxed. Maybe not the super rich, but also those that have enough resources to contribute. Or we also have to think about green global levies, like the ones that are being, as of now, discussed in the IMO and are being, I would say, put in question by some countries, including developing countries. Or the simple recognition that the world is not the same as it was in 1992 when the Rio Accords were signed. But on the other hand, that also is why developed countries must make a sincere effort in providing more concessional financing, better debt instruments, as the three co-panelists have really rightly highlighted, or why also things like better beneficial ownership transparency and tax cooperation and tax justice are essential. Now, based on these principles, I will move now to your second question, how we will try to, let's say, work with what we have, with what is possible and what is doable in Seville. Look, the first thing in our head is that we see this conference as an opportunity to reaffirm multilateralism, the value it has and the values it has. That we remain united despite the challenges, despite the fact that there might be some that might not be any longer, let's say, following the same path, that we remain united to achieve sustainable development. And the key word here, I would say, is trust. Trust in the international system, trust in multilateralism. And Seville will definitely be a litmus test for that. And of course, I mean, we acknowledge that preserving this trust will require moving the goalposts. Previous speakers have already said it all. And as the host country, I can only reiterate that we will be as ambitious as possible in any areas. But then again comes the pragmatism I already mentioned. And here we'll give you a concrete example, and I think this is something that has, to me, a lot of promise. The UN, with our support, and we've been working together on that, has already announced the launch of the Seville Platform for Action, which will basically ensure that there will be real-life implementation of the commitments that will be contained in the overall political declaration, or to even go beyond them. So it will basically be a sort of umbrella for those actors, be it governments, international organizations, private sector actors, philanthropists, civil society, that are willing and able to implement concrete actions or commitments. So they will be able to propose them, they will be evaluated, and if they meet a number of criteria, which are already posted in the UNDESA website, they will be put as part of this umbrella for others to join and for these commitments, again, to become reality. So things that we are thinking about, in Spain, from debt swaps for sustainable investments to debt suspension clauses in loans for vulnerable developing countries. Of course, the issues of SDRs, rechanneling more SDRs, rechanneling them to MDBs for those that can. Unfortunately, we cannot because of being part of the Eurozone, but trust me, we are behind that. Or also things like ensuring that the ODA, even if it's not as high as it should be, it's more effective and more impactful. So again, these are just examples that Spain is thinking in terms of concrete actions that we would like to be put under this umbrella to implement the commitments in the declaration. But I'm sure that there will be many more, and I think this will be differential. So I hope this kind of gives you a first example of what our thinking is in this regard. And yeah, again, pragmatic but ambitious at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, as you said, you set the bar at exactly the right level. You set it at the level of realism. You took into account the challenges that we face and the scale of those challenges. And you focused highly specifically on particular targets that appear realistic, albeit challenging, in present circumstances. So I think that's very helpful. What I'm going to do now, if I may, and I'm very conscious that you have to leave us in about 20 minutes or so I would like to come back to you once more if I can, but I'm going to ask for very short responses to that. First of all, from Jose Antonio, who knows the space extraordinarily well, and then from Michel and from Musa, just in terms of the characterization of the objectives that you've just heard. Do you think anything is missing from that? Do you think anything should be added to that? Anything that you feel it should be part of the agenda? And you're perfectly entitled to say, no, I think the agenda is perfect, but whatever one can contribute.
Well, I think the agenda is quite complete in the first draft. I mean, also in the zero draft. I think there are issues that, for example, the expert group have proposed that are not yet. Actually, some are in the proposed declaration from the Club de Madrid, which are, interesting proposals. But perhaps what should be more clear, perhaps the emphasis. I started with the two issues, and I guess the other panelists also underscored those. For example, the issue of debt. The issue of debt is by far the most urgent a mechanism, and so it should be really underscored in the document. And also today, the issue of ODA and the form of concessional financing, which is, is another absolutely critical issue. I mean, those are two issues. Now, we can go over other. I mean, one thing that is very important and should certainly be in the statement of Club de Madrid is the national dimensions that have to be developed. So national tax reforms, which are progressive, do not give excessive incentives to private investment, but rather use private investment well. The role of national development banks, which is a topic that is in the draft and is very, very important. This is an issue in which, for example, for Africa, is quite important. Latin America has a few countries that do have their own development banks, but others that do not, for example. Asia is much better in that regard. But that's a very important point, which is important in terms of the collaboration of multilateral with national development banks, but also what national development banks do in terms of credit, but also guarantees for private investment and venture funds, venture capital funds for promoting new firms, which is a mechanism that a few developing countries in Latin America are already developing, and it's quite important, as we know from the experience of the United States. And in that regard, the promotion of private investment at the national level is quite important, for example. So those are issues. And let me perhaps underscore the issue that Michelle mentioned in the beginning, I did not, which is the issue of the institutional reforms are important. And I would say in that regard, there are three dimensions, the so-called voice and participation of developing countries in the Bretton Woods institution is a very important point, including, very importantly, basic votes, increasing basic votes, which today are half of what they were approved in Bretton Woods in 1944. This is very important for poor and small countries. That's basically the votes that they have in these institutions. The second is the creation of new institutions in the area of debt, which I mentioned, a long-term institution for debt, but also what is going to be the institution that will take care of international tax cooperation, which in my view, or in the view of the expert group, should be the promotion of the expert group of the United Nations into an intergovernmental organ, as that's the proposal. And the last issue in institutional is strengthening regional cooperation. So aside from global institutions, we need a very strong set of regional institutions. Now, we have that in the case of the development banks, but we do not in other areas. For example, in international monetary cooperation, in the developing world, we have the Shanghai Initiative and the Latin American Reserve Fund, which, by the way, is only half of the Latin American countries are members. So those institutions should be strengthened, but there have to be many other institutions in Africa, in Asia also, that promote. And also in international tax cooperation. For two things, just to exchange views about, what are policies that that have worked in their countries. And from my point of view, supporting the administrative capacity of tax countries, of countries to tax at the national level, which is a very important point, of course. And let me say that I find that aside from the very good work, actually, that the IMF does in that regard, the fiscal department of the IMF does a very good job in that regard, I think the South-South cooperation is very important. So, what one country can teach about another country in the region of how to improve their administrative capacity in taxation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think these are tangible, practical, actionable feedbacks and most useful. Michelle, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I think that if you put 10 people together, probably they will be able to create a list of more and more and more and more and more objectives and goals. We have seen that in all the process in the UN when we were discussing the SDGs and so on. But I guess the agenda is pretty complete. And of course, it's ambitious, but on the other hand, it's very pragmatic. And I think that's necessary because we need people to have the expectations on the real geopolitical situation, what is possible to get. And I'd really like the message of pragmatism, but at the same time of optimism in terms of maximizing whatever is possible. And I think that's a real good approach to that, to have very big goals, ambitious goals, but on the other hand, to identify what is viable and what our priorities are and what is viable. And I really like the principles, because one of the things that I felt is not in the discussion, Frances, was the second one you mentioned, that development needed to close gender gaps. That for me is a real important thing, and as the others. And also the idea that it has to be sustainable development or other one, it won't last, and also the idea of the shared responsibilities. I really am very happy that Spain pretends to insist on the taxation for the super rich and the higher rich, because I think that's a very important issue. In terms of development assistance, we have not advanced much from the last conference on the social development, and I think we need to understand that development assistance is not merely a financial transaction; it's a long-term investment in global peace and stability. But I also think we need to see that the challenges we face today, including climate change, economic instability, political conflict, migrations, as you mentioned, Shan, before, they're all interconnected, and no country would solve them alone. So I'm convinced that our collective security and prosperity depends on our ability to address these issues together, which is why international cooperation must remain at the heart of our development strategy. Finally, something from Latin America, where we're talking about regional cooperation, but we also try to think of regional trade. Latin America and the Caribbean is the region with less inter-regional trade, and that is something that I think it hinders the capacity and the possibility of the region. But of course, I will stay here because I think we need to improve our capacities. We need to ensure that member states, as I said before, have a courageous, bold stand for these things, and that leadership will be discussed and leadership will be shown. We also have the possibility in Sevilla to identify innovative ways of financing that should be showcased, and that could be very interesting for many places. But what I expect most from Sevilla, and I know that Spain is doing that, is leadership, is to lead the process where we can get together the multilateral system and identify that we have no time to lose, that we need to ensure success on what's possible, but also what is urgent and needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I think the perspectives are absolutely relevant and should inform the agenda. Musa.
Thank you, Shen. We are advocating for a debt relief, or a debt treatment to restructure our public debt, but we have to know also we had this same situation 25 years ago. That's why I think by treating the current situation, we have also to work on the structural reform, the structural change, in order to avoid this problem in 10 or 20 years again. For that, it is mandatory to work on the internal resources of African states, and particularly the fiscal resources, the tax resources. The rate of fiscal resources to GDP is the lowest in Africa. We have a round of 12%. If I take the example of Nigeria, it is less than 10%. The biggest country in the continent is really performing very bad on this way. We have to work in order to get, maybe in 10 years, 20% of GDP going to the fiscal resources and to the state means. For that, cooperation, we mentioned tax cooperation, international tax cooperation is needed, because a lot of international companies, a lot of big companies in Africa are not really fair to follow the rule. We have to fight against fiscal escape, fiscal fraud. We have also to fight against money laundering from Africa to the other part of the world. It was the case to the northern part, but now it is more and more the case to the southern part of the world. Middle East, Southeast Asia, we have to work on that. We have to work also to ban the tax havens. Tax havens are some areas to host a lot of product of fraud, of crime. And we have to work on administrative reforms to enlarge the fiscal means. All of that is also to give enough means and enough resources to the state in order them to avoid to rely on debt and external resources. Finally, we have to remind also in Africa, we have to clean our own street and our own garden. Fight against corruption, good governance, good management of taxes, strengthen our internal relationship, the project of AfTA, African Free Trade Area, which is slowing now. We have to accelerate it in order to share prosperity within us. And that will help, I think, to strengthen the internal resources in order to avoid to talk about this issue in the next 10 or 20 years. This is what I would like to add to the specific debate on debt relief and debt treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Musa. Francesca, I'm going to come straight back to you because you're the one under greatest time pressure at the moment, and I'm very conscious of that. So would you like to respond to these additional observations made by members of the panel in Nairobi and convey any particular perspectives that you think arise from them? And then, if I may, I'm going to add one or two thoughts on the back end of it just as you're ready to leave. But I want to make sure you have the time to speak first.
No, thanks. I do have like 15, 20 more minutes, so I am happy to intervene again if needed. Also, I'm very happy to. Look, I mean, I'm glad that the three distinguished panelists are, I would say, satisfied with the outlook we have for the conference, the way we're framing it, at least the way I see it in my case. And I think it's the same way the whole government is seeing it, to be honest. And the fact that the agenda is complete. Now, listening to some of the comments, especially those by Professor Campo, I think he mentioned three issues which would be, in a way, low-hanging fruit, and that we should really focus on them. The role of national development banks, I think that's something which creates a lot of consensus and that can be further developed. The strengthening of regional cooperation, this is very important. This is something that also as a member of the EU, we need to work on, I would say, and nothing is perfect, even if it looks shiny from the outside, it's still difficult. So definitely regional cooperation is crucial to advance development. And the role of capacity building, be it in terms of taxation management and taxation systems or other areas. Now, there's just a point. We always talk about capacity building, which is right, but it's also important to focus on capacity retention. Because if we build capacities, if we train experts, but then their salaries or their conditions are not good and they leave for the private sector in a few months, we have to start again. So the retention angle is also very important. The means for the retention are very important. Now, also, I want to thank President Bachelet for her words. In terms of leadership, now, Spain will do the very best it can. What I can assure you is that our Prime Minister Sánchez, is fully committed and extremely motivated to make the Sevilla conference a huge success. I must also admit that it scares me a little bit, but we'll do everything in our hand to show this leadership that you are counting on us to have, President Bachelet. And also on identifying innovative ways of financing. Yes, we're thinking about it, but how can I say it? It's easier said than done in a sense that identifying them might be doable, but agreeing on them is the hard part. And that's where we are pressed on time, right? I mean, there's always caveats and countries that are not happy with that. It's too risky. It's going to be hard. But again, the work of even identifying them is worth it. So yes, full support on that. And also thanks for the support on the principles. I think they are crucial. And also to President Mara, what can I say? I mean, I think all the items he listed in terms of how to tackle the debt challenge are right. Also on how these countries that are more affected by this debt burden have also responsibility and a duty to improve things. So what can I say? I mean, again, it goes both ways. And I think developing countries are also, let's say, they also need to acknowledge these things that President Mara has said. But at the same time, of course, developed countries also need to acknowledge that things must be done better and instruments must be put in place. So yes, I mean, thanks also to the three panelists for supporting us in our views.
Wonderful. I think we can actually draw this panel to a close. I think we're at a point where most of what needed to be said has been said. And I'm just going to try and do one or two things in terms of synthesis. Because the first very obvious point is that whereas we can distinguish between tax reform, maintaining ODA, the central role of trade, and the absolutely imperative need to reconsider debt pricing and the availability of finance in practical terms. And that probably requires a complete rethink on credit rating. I think people have forgotten what happened with the Basel Accords. We actually took the capacity out of private lenders to be able to assess the risk associated with lending in developing countries, because we limited the amount that they could, under Basel, make available to developing countries. As a consequence, they let people go. And one of the great difficulties that we have, one of the reasons why such excessive interest rates are frequently charged in developing countries, is precisely because there aren't mechanisms any longer within financial institutions to accurately assess credit risk. And that's part of the problem in this regard. I mean, let's remember that the global financial crisis didn't begin in some developing or least developed country. It began in the subprime market in the United States of America, right? So the idea that automatically, because you're a developing country, you are much more risky, and hence debt ought to be much higher priced, is actually a silly argument. What we need to do is enhance capacity for assessment and then recognize that we need a series of grants and concessionary lending instruments to support it. But none of that, as Musa has said very well, is an excuse for developing countries not to get their own house in order. And getting their own house in order, as Francesca's pointed out very well, requires support and interaction in a collaborative and responsible way with advanced economies and with international financial institutions. And the risk of migration of skills after capacity has been created, as you pointed out, Francesca, is very real. It's been one of the curses of developing economies over the course of the past decade. So there's a collective responsibility here. And if you can shape the discussions in Sevilla toward recognition on all parts of that collective responsibility in an integrated response to a profound question, you'll have done the world an enormous service, which will set up well, I believe, for the World Social Summit and the G20 Summit at the end of the year. You are, in a certain sense, the groundbreakers in this particular regard. I think that approach will help square the circle between tensions in the electorates of advanced economies and the expectations of developing economies in respect of these. If one shows that developing economies understand their responsibilities and are committing to address their own weaknesses in this regard, I think it will become easier to persuade electorates in the advanced economies, possibly even in the United States. I could make that case to the Senate Finance Committee, for example. It'd be tough to make it in the White House at the moment, perhaps, but you could make it to the Senate Finance Committee, certainly. And then lastly, if I may, one other opportunity that Sevilla may offer you is the ability to take the financing instruments available through the Bretton Woods institutions and the multilateral development banks that they have spawned, if you like, on the one hand, and the alternative financing institutions that were created in the aftermath of the financial crisis, chiefly by China, in terms of the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, the New Development Bank, and the like, and make sure that they're all, broadly speaking, on one page in this regard. Because competitive bidding and reciprocal criticism takes us nowhere in respect of a collective action problem. So I think the panel has done superbly in laying out the challenges. You've done superbly, if I may say so, Francesca, in indicating how Spain is going to be approaching this as the host country. And collectively, I think we can all only hope that we set the stage in Sevilla for a program that actually leads to adequate financing for development in the context of a restructured international financial architecture, also providing funding for a just energy transition in the context of the challenges that we face in respect of climate, oceans, and the like. So thank you all very much, and may I ask all of you to thank our panelists for the extraordinary contributions they've made. You have it?
Thank you so much, Sean, for your guidance and very good moderation there. And thank you to all our panelists. You may take your seats. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end of this session, morning session. So we are going to take a coffee break just outside conference room 4 for 30 minutes. So we will reconvene at 12:20 at conference room 4, not in this hall. We are going to have to deep dive into deeper into the topic. So the upcoming topic is scaling up funding and reforming financial institutions. So it's going to be an extension and a deeper, in-depth, focused discussion on this topic. So please take note of time. We started late, so we will not want to extend the time to eat into the time of the other sessions. So the staff of Club de Madrid will be on standby to guide you. If you need any clarification or comments, please ask the staff of Club de Madrid. You'll spot them. Naomi is here, Celia and others, even Ruben, you'll see them. Thank you so much. So we take a 30 minutes coffee break. Thank you. Yeah, what's your name?